Hello, everyone, those who are here. I'm Utkarsh. I'm a product manager and co-founder of Creators of Products. In case you don't know what Creators of Products is, we are an open community for all kinds of product creators. We have people like product managers, designers, engineers, founders, and different other kinds of product builders. And the kind of discussions that we have is how to build better products, how can you grow in your career. And we have very specific initiatives like mentorship, getting a job, getting a resume reviewed, and a lot others. Do join us on Slack. I will share a link shortly to our website. Today is the fourth and final session of our series Design for Everyone. This is a session series that we conducted revolving around how to work with designers. So for a PM or an engineer or as a founder, or like for today, we have for product and tech leaders. In general, how do you work with them? How do you enable a better environment for them? So the title of today's session is Building and Growing Design Teams. We have two amazing speakers with us, Shaheena Attarwala and Abhinit Tiwari. Before I hand over to them, we have 3 other sessions live, which are already available on YouTube. I'll share a link to that as well. In case you haven't taken a look at them, do check them out. Yeah, that's about it from me. One other important detail. So how this session will run is Shaheena and Abhinit will speak for some time. Like close to maybe 35 to 40 minutes. They have a few slides prepared. Then we'll take in questions from the audience. Also, they do have a session within this while they are speaking, when they'll be taking some audience questions. So do type in your questions in the chat, and then we can take it as we go ahead. That's about it from me. Over to you, Abhinit and Shaheena. And thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us, Utkarsh. Shaheena, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So as Utkarsh am I audible?
Yep.
So as Utkarsh mentioned, today's session is about designing design orgs. And I'm Shaheena. I work in Microsoft and I lead a design and research team, which tackles problems in emerging market. Yeah, that's about that from me. Over to you, Abhinit.
Yeah. Hi, folks. I'm Abhinit. I currently head design at GoPay, which is a go-to group company, a company in Indonesia which has Gojek, Tokopedia, and GoPay. Before this, I was heading design at Gojek for about 6 years. Before that, I founded my own tiny little services company, which I ran for 9 years. And yeah, I think that's enough of an introduction. The rest we'll tell you about our story as we go forward.
Awesome. So, okay, just a minute. I'll just close the window. Cat just came. Really sorry. All right. Sorry, folks, about that. So touching upon this topic of designing design or like, so how we've basically spanned the session is touching upon smaller sections of the entire journey of designing a design org. So the first, I think it would be great if we touch upon what is design orgs look like, right? There are small, medium, and large design orgs. And what are the definitions or just a general understanding of these small, medium, and large design orgs? So generally, a small org is a small design org, a team would range from somewhere between 1 to say 50. And 50 to 100 would be considered as a medium sized design org. And then over and above that would be considered as something as a big design studio and large design studio, and something which is more 1,000 plus is like an MNC or a conglomerate, which has, multiple chains, which is something like a Microsoft or an MNC, which has more than thousands of designers, right? So now design teams are, like I said, small, medium, and large. And depending on the organization scales, design teams are formed and evolved. I think let's talk a bit about how we get designers early on in the design teams. So let me talk a bit about my experience of my early days. My first proper job was with Book My Show, where we were just 2 people. I was the second designer that they hired. And in 2008, when I just joined, we were about to hire a design manager for us because we were just very, very young at that point. So I remember my experience in being a participant, being one of the interviewers for our first design manager at Book My Show. And I didn't have prior experience to interviewing, and this was my first, and it was quite surreal and different, I would say, right? And later, like I joined Shadi.com, which had like 15 plus or 20 odd plus designers in the 2011s and 12s, and for a medium sized company at that point, Shadi.com, it was a good enough number, and cut forward today in 2022, which I work in Microsoft under the design Studio 91 design org, which is a design wing under the experiences and devices org. And this just one org in India itself has around 250 plus designers, right? And again, adding more every day. So it's like any other, house, every design org scales from small, medium to large. Microsoft also has had a journey, and the studio I work at one point, it just had like 5, 6 designers in those olden days, and it has grown. So Abhinit, your work at GoPay today, Gojek previously, you've also handled like hundreds of designers, you've worked with them. So can you talk a bit about your experience in like having worked in different size orgs?
Yeah, but I think to begin with, I think this defining small, medium, large by size, I would slightly disagree. And I think I've changed this definition as I progressed in my career. I used to think 50 people is a giant design team. Now I put large teams at somewhere around 200 plus or something like that. But talking about my experience, I think the tiniest team I ever built and ran was at Left Shift back in 2008. For the longest time, I was the only designer, and it took a lot of bravery to convince myself that I can hire and lead more of them. Left Shift was obviously a services company, but then we moved to Gojek, and we had about 7 designers. Right? So that's a really tiny team. Then we moved to Gojek in 2016, and the team immediately doubled, right, to around 15-20 people. And I thought this was a giant team. From 2016 to 2018, for people who are unfamiliar with Gojek, right, like we hit the product market fit jackpot. We couldn't build products fast enough and couldn't onboard people fast enough. So between 2016 and 18, I think we grew from that 15-20 number to about 60-ish designers. And then 2018 to 2020, I think we reached about 130 designers, right? So that's generally been my experience. I would say that right now I'd call Gojek's design team quite large, especially if you compare relatively with other unicorns and startups. But of course, nothing compared to the numbers that you just put out from Microsoft. That's just insane. So again, like and now that we've kind of gotten our experience and the definitions in place, the next thing to talk about is what is our objective today. So me and Shaheena were talking, and we thought that our objective today is to arm you with the knowledge of what design can do for your org, and more importantly, how to go about adding design and designers to your team. Before we get into that challenge of scaling up and growing the team, however, let's start with those of you who don't have any designers in your teams yet and are wondering if this is the right time to go about kicking off a design team. So Shaheena, this is my first question to you. What according to you is the right time to hire your first designer?
Yeah, I think we've all as designers been through that journey where we would have ideally probably been the first designer at some company or the other, right? And that question booms in our head, like, should we hire now? Should we not hire? But really, when is the right time? I would say it's always day one. But it always should be day one, because design is an integral part of solution building. And if we see how products really shape up, companies generally start, or startup founders, and they start with an idea, and at what stage the company is, really, is when the people who are involved in the early stage idea generation is when they decide that when do we need a designer. So it doesn't really click sometimes in their head that, oh, we need a designer early on. And whether the designer is even relevant to them, that's a bigger question. Sometimes there's lack of awareness. So for example, some time back I was engaged with a SaaS product company, Pixo, where I was the first designer that they actually got on board, and they had no idea how to go about it. They had an idea in place, a little bit of go-to-market strategy they had in place, but really the product was purely back end, and in front end they had nothing. So how does that consumer journey really go? What is the user experience? And that nothing was shaped. So I was brought in a little later in the process, where you technically start working backwards with a solution in hand, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the story. A lot of our designers would be able to relate, that you're working backwards a lot of times, but it's always important to be at the day one and at the early stage of the idea generation, because as designers, the earlier you get involved, the more user centricity you can bring to a product. Because if you're coming very late in the system, then what happens is you're optimizing for execution most of the time, right? And the space for research or customer understanding interaction, it just gets lost. So I would always say that the best time to hire is day one, and as early as you can in the life cycle of the product.
Sure.
But Abhinit, do you also think that way? Or what has your experience been? I know you have also had journeys of being the first designer in one company.
Sure. Yeah, like I talk to a lot of founders these days. And I think when founders come talking to me, it's mostly to answer this question, right? They're looking for a designer, and they're at various stages in their, in scaling up or growing their company. One word, a single word answer I'd have is, yeah, now, or maybe yesterday is when you needed a designer. But more seriously, like you mentioned Wixo, right? I think they had already hired a designer before you joined. They just didn't know they'd hired themselves as designers, because I agree with you when you say that we need designers right from the beginning, especially because if you've identified the market, if you've identified who the customer is, and if you have any kind of solution in place, somebody designed it, right? And if you still don't have a designer in place, pause and think. You're building up design debt, and chances are somebody has already become the designer, right? And that person isn't really trained in design, so you would be much better off if you actually had some experience with design. Of course, some people tend to think that there are some kinds of problems. Like I've talked to founders who are building, say, a SaaS product for just engineers, right? They tend to think that maybe ours is not that much of a B2C product or a customer centric product, so we can we understand the user base already, we can get away with that. But the thing is, then maybe you don't need a very senior designer, right? You need need somebody who can at least get the basics right, and not do stupid things which will create usability issues and result in a loss of customers, a loss of revenue later. So yeah, sorry, going around in circles, but I completely agree. You should, I would say, you should hire your first designer as soon as you've identified what the problem is and what the market is, and no later than that. But yeah, I think Shaheena, one more thing. I think we skipped a step. What I've realized talking to these people is also that most people have difficulty saying if they need a designer, because most people have difficulty understanding what all design does or a designer do, right? So let's step back a little and try to define design, difficult as it is. So what would be design according to you?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right, Abhinit, and you make a great point that we sometimes don't ourselves understand what exactly design is. And I think I don't blame a lot of founders and people around who do not understand. Sorry. So yeah, it is definitely messed up a bit, and I don't blame them, because design is a lot of things, especially in the tech space, right? It has evolved from graphic designers, web designers, and today the the list of kind of designers that are there, right? From motion, content, UX researchers, interaction, design systems designers, service designers, product, UX, etc. You can just, and now metaverse and Web3. So it just keeps
You can add designer after anything.
anything, right? So, and as if this wasn't enough, there's a lot of like management side to this as well, and management and IC tracks. So we'll talk about it a bit later. And
free वाटत नाही ना बेटा
this, the mic is on.
I'm hearing Marathi after a really long time.
Yeah, I'm also hearing Marathi. So getting back to what I was saying is that the management side, which has design managers, leads, and creative directors, VPs, and chief design officers, and whatnot, right? So of course, it's a lot of things to bundle up into one word, which is design. But the thing is, this is a good problem to have. It signifies that design is growing. It is being acknowledged as a craft, as a function. But it's not just the problem about, I think, problem solving. It's how we eventually now, in today's day and age, land up solving problem. Like, for example, earlier, a lot of you might be able to relate, a graphic designer would be expected to do a lot of these things, from solving problems to creating banners, and seriously, he would probably land up doing everything. But today, based on the problem your organization is actually solving and the scale at which your organization is solving that problem, you will a la carte your design team in that sense, as per your needs and the business requirements and the user pain points, right? In fact, Abhinit, here I would like to talk about an approach of describing design, which is by contrasting different disciplines of design. In the Netflix series, I'm not sure if everybody has seen, but you might have noticed a designer called Neri Oxman, which is also a professor at MIT Labs and also known as a Renaissance woman, who presented a diagram for her team's process with an interesting perspective. And I'll just bring that diagram up. Right.
Yep.
And probably to understand this better, we can look at this diagram, which signifies a lot about the technicalities of design, which she's already outlined in the movie, in the abstract series. And this is called this is called the cycle of creativity. And I know, Abhinit, you really love this diagram, and I would leave for you to talk a bit about this.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely love this. I've spent a lot of time sharing this with a lot of people, especially business folks and product folks, because there's a lot of misconception. And the beauty of this thing is, like, you can read it in many ways. I'll try to read it in one way. So we'll go clockwise. At the top, you see culture and nature. First is science. What science does is it takes information, like, say, apple is falling, right? And that's just information, how fast it's falling, and turns it into knowledge, which is gravity, 9.8 meters per second per second. And then with this knowledge, engineering takes that knowledge and creates utility out of it. So they'll take gravity, let's say, make gravitational potential energy and convert it into hydroelectric power and then generate electricity out of it, right? But that's what engineering does, right? That's when design comes in. Design takes this utility that's come from nature and from science and from engineering, relates it to cultural behavior in people, how societies work, how they think, what do they do, and turn this utility into something people would want to use, which people would get value out of. And then finally, there's art, which personally annoys me the most, because a lot of people confuse design and art. Art takes this behavior in how society does things and uses that to ask questions about our perception of nature itself. Sorry if I'm being too vague. Another way to, but I'll happily answer questions later. But another way to read this diagram is from top to bottom. At the top are culture and nature, right? Culture is what people do, right? Nature is what sustains life. And design and engineering basically use their knowledge of culture and nature to create utility for humans, right? So I think the point that we want to make is that design is not art, design is not engineering. It's its own thing. It's been around for very long. And I saw somebody recently There's some Twitter thread somewhere where somebody was like, "Hey, design came recently in 20 years." No, it didn't. It's existed for a long time. It was a little late to come in software. But not to digress. Um, I hope that made sense, and I hope you understand what design does a little bit better now. And now that we understand that, let's go back, Shaheena, to how does one know what kind of designer to hire?
Wow, I'm still so fascinated with this diagram that we can spend some more time, but yeah, I know we're short of time. So really it really depends, Abhinit, like what kind of designers to hire. And I know this is a very cliche answer which many of us keep hearing time and again. Anybody we ask who to hire, just tell us, just give us a binary answer. But it seriously depends, right? What kind of problem you're solving and what stage is your product at. All of these really make a huge difference, right? So for example, let me just take a few companies and to put it in context. For a company like Atlassian, right, which is with designs tool like Jira, which is a software for engineers, and many more engineers and product managers use that, will more likely focus, they'll need like interface designers or design systems designers early on. And maybe most of the time their priority will be to hire these kind of designers because they bring in probably more chunk of work. And eventually, as they move up refining and defining their product, they would bring in more special designers, say motion designers if they want, icon designers, illustration designers, etc. Right? These are also part of the product, but interface and systems designer will probably form the core part of their design team. And something like, say, example, Dr. Reddy's lab, which is a pathology, which isn't really, competing on design or the actual experience of the software, whereas it is actually competing on the better end-to-end service, which is on ground, the end-to-end service better than their competition. So they might need something more like our friend Param, who's very well known in the industry and one of the best service designers we have. So for a company, say like Dr. Reddy's lab, they'll probably need some more service designers with them, qualitative researchers as top priorities, and maybe interface designer would come a little later in the priority matrix for them. But there's a reason for it, right? So it helps in prioritizing the problem that we're trying to solve. And again, it goes back to the user pain point, whether the offline experience is a huge pain for the business and the user. And let's take another example, say Urban Clap, which is an amalgamation of online experience and offline. You book a service online, you experience the service on offline, which is what a lot of actual physical in-store experiences are like. Now, the bigger question here is that will Urban Clap's interface really impact the service that is experienced offline? The most often the answer is that if an offline service go wrong, then the online experience truly doesn't matter to the consumer. So how does Urban Clap really build a service which is a good online experience, where they'll need user experience designers also, and they'll also need good service designers as well, along with a great customer experience designer, which can understand the entire end-to-end journey. My previous company, say Book My Show, which had a very straightforward problem statement, booking tickets, which got sorted in 5-6 steps. But that experience again is an offline experience. So there are a lot of more than designers, like customer experience designer might look at how the service is experienced on the ground. We'll have more field workers who we'll have to talk to, collaborate to. So that becomes a different level of expertise from designers who can understand the field much better than I can. The other very latest is, cred. I think Abhinit was mentioning this to me, that the first designer cred hired was a motion designer. And that speaks volume about where this product is headed or what is the ambition of this product, right? And I think this paves path for the way design org is designed. Whether motion design is a priority, what are you trying to really compete here and make your competitive edge? So really, it depends on the kind of problem, the kind of product you're looking to ship at, and that really helps in building that design org and helps you take intentional decisions. Because just because another company is hiring 10 researchers, we'll also go ahead and hire 10 researchers. It has to be intentional, because at the end of the day, there is, engineering, designers, and product manager. There's a certain ratio also that we talk about. But at the end of the day, if you're completely clueless, I think, as Abhinit mentioned, founders, designers, or even anybody on this call, we all should reach out to somebody we look up to in the design field and say, hey, I have this problem. I'm looking to build a design team, or I'm looking to hire my first designer. How do I go about it? And most often than not, people are extremely warm and they're happy to help and guide you in that sense, right? So now that hopefully we've understood what design is a bit better and have made up our minds that let's go and hire our first designer, let's talk a bit about people who already have designers and who think motivating them or growing them, coaching them, mentoring is actually one of the key aspects of, oops, my
You
God.
bought something.
Yeah, books.
Thank God it was books. Not something else. And I think China, you skipped a slide.
Yeah, so this was the last one, and this is yeah,
I think you meant to show this while you were speaking, right?
I wanted to show this and I completely forgot. But yeah, I mentioned about
Okay.
the type of designers and the a la carte of design specialties that we have. So now typically what happens in the beginning, design leads towards the right, which you can see in the diagram, which is the engineering bit, right? So they generally focus more on execution, focus on shipping the product fast, learning fast. So it's more engineering focused, craft focused, execution focused. This is mainly because these small setups, right? And Abhinit and many of you have already worked, including me, in small setups where we want to move fast, we want to break things fast, learn things fast, right? And in these setups, the stakeholders, including the designers, they have enough clarity on their roadmaps, the problem statements they're solving, and the only real need for the stakeholders is to make their ideas and imagination into reality. But as you keep double clicking, right, on these problems, more and more problems will really show up. For example, customers will start complaining about the service quality. And soon enough, you'll realize that even though your designs are better crafted, your design system is in place, your still complaints are coming. And you can see these in various applications, right? Consumer facing applications, whether food delivery, ride hailing, or even ticket bookings, right? Design can only impact interface in a way that they can do the best online, but what about offline experience? That's where the experience also lies. And as designers, you're basically doing everything, right? At some point, early stage design. If you need a website or a promotional banner, your Bablu designer will actually do it. If you need a search engine listings, Bablu designer is ready to do it. If you have like movie goers in Bathinda, who are complaining about some experience on ground or something happening, ticket nahi mila ya QR code nahi aaya, so even that, your Bablu designer will become your researcher. He'll go and talk to your consumers on what's going on, and things are moving quite fast. But however, your Bablu designer who's doing everything is actually unhappy at that point. So I don't know if we have Bablu designers here or researchers, but any guesses on why the Bablu designer is unhappy? Maybe somebody in the audience, if they have questions about this, we can just hold on. If Utkarsh, we have any questions about
Yeah,
this.
we can take a break and take questions. And yeah, and if you have any guesses why this is not a very happy situation for a designer to be in most teams, you're welcome.
I don't see any major questions other than what Abhinit has answered. Let's see, people, if you have any questions, now is the time to ask. If not, then we'll go ahead.
Yeah. So I think as we were talking about a Bablu designer who we always have that, every startup has that one designer. And the problem actually with being a Bablu or a jack of all trade is that at some point in your career, you will start feeling like you're not mastering anything. while generalists actually give a product a lot of speed of shipping, and they don't really have to communicate like the context to anyone else, right? They don't even need to get to the depth of it, because the problem statement at early on is very straightforward, and doesn't have to be that deep. But as you keep mastering your art craft, and as the product also keeps evolving, you might think about things like your business. You might also think about eventually the complex problems that the business starts facing, especially as the business grows and the product diversifies in problem statements. So as a person, designing the design orgs, you really have just two choices. Either you keep insisting on every designer being a full stack designer, or common word generalist designer, and at the end of quarters you risk losing some of those designers, or really start thinking about like which of your problems eventually problems as in the product problem might eventually become more and more complex, and start thinking about hiring specialists at some point of the product timeline. So these are really two things that really you might want to think as you're going ahead in your own journey as a building design orgs. But Abhinit, I wanted to ask you, have you created space for like specialists at some point in your career?
Yeah, Shaheena, that was pretty deep. So yeah, I've been in situations like you described. Up until I think 50-60 people, we were all generalists, right? Like and like hyper generalists. So we would make hoarding for hiring engineers in Gojek as well. We would make T-shirts to give out at RubyConf as well. We would do the UI as well. We do the research as well. We obviously make icons. Who else will make it? We do motion design also. Anything you name it. We do slide designs when our Google slides needed to look pretty as well, right? So yeah, pretty much did that, and I felt this unhappiness that you spoke of up close. And more than that, I also saw the business needs become more and more complex, right? Like we required experts. The problems that 5 years ago we thought a single pizza team or a two pizza team will be able to solve and ship and take to market, those problems became so deep that the generalist designers simply couldn't cope up, right? Or they could cope up, but they need focus, right? I'll give you an example, right? So for example, take ride hailing apps. I think Uber probably is the first one. I don't know, there might be another one, but 2008 2009 is around when Uber was founded. 2009, I think that's around when ride hailing took off. Soon other ride hailing companies around the world followed suit. I think they realized like we have this problem as well, wouldn't it be nice? Now for a designer in these series A, series B companies, discovering problems didn't actually require doing a lot of foundational research, right? Or would not have, this is my guess, right? Because the primary problem is China is at place A, you need to drop them at place B, and there's a driver in the middle and some software connecting all of these people. So the primary problem, as you earlier said, like the designers, the skills that you need is mostly towards the right, towards closer to engineering. Make interfaces, make sure it's usable, make sure it's accessible, make sure it's easy to develop, blah, 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 right? And that's how people work. And then slowly, the ride hailing problem starts getting complex. But cut to say 2020, right? And by now, or actually I skipped a step. So in the beginning, it was just ride hailing, right? Then maybe people added something like, say, multiple stops, right? Because some people requested it. And then slowly, as it got complex, cut to 2020. By now, ride hailing apps don't just have multiple stops; they have capability to see driver's location real time. Driver can see your location real time. Advanced mapping and routing, ability to tip drivers, ability to pool rides with people, able to rate drivers, change payment methods. I can keep going on and on, right? The number of features in simple ride hailing products is insane. And then I think some ride hailing companies, after they did all of this, and they also started saying, we will make autonomous cars, right? Like we'll remove the driver from the picture itself, and like the cars will drive themselves. So that's kind of, and to do this, right, they'd need automobile designers, they'd need design ethicists, right? You're driving car, where do you stop? Who do you stop for? designers who have strong and deep experience with, say, AI based or machine learning systems, some academic backgrounds, right? So this example just exists to say that, it is in nature of systems to become complex. And if you're building a company to last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you end up double clicking on your problems so much that you will eventually need, some people to focus and go deep in some areas. And this is honestly how all creative professions work. Take engineering, for example. If you put it on ride hailing, any company in the beginning would have probably a monolith, with a simple ride allocation engine which matches the driver to a person. Keep adding people to it, keep scaling it to multiple countries, a number of people, and eventually this will become a 1,000 data input model, right? Which is taking, real time computing everything and doing advanced calculations to pick the right driver for the right person, and would be well beyond the means of a small 5-6 people team running it. So yeah, again, the point is that systems become complex, and this is a problem of all creative professions. Eventually you need to foster expertise, and doubly triply so if your business or your problem intends to compete on the quality of engineering or the quality of design, if it's a differentiator for your business. So yeah, so the answer to, have I created room for specialists? Yeah, I have, and I've done that because I've seen these business problems get complex, and I've seen designers struggle with it. And at what point should you figure out that you need to create room for both generalists and specialists to thrive? The answer is, you better be right on time. Because as you said earlier, if you're too late, you'll risk some people leaving in search of depth somewhere else, or you will simply drop your quality levels, right? Because jack of all trades, master of one, oftentimes better than none is true, but it does come with a quality cap. So if you're betting on that one thing, let's say your brand, to be the differentiation, to really stand out, to make your company the coolest ever, most likely the generalist will not be able to beat a specialist brand design team somewhere else.
Yeah.
Cool. But a question back at you, Shaheena. So at what point did you make a growth path or a career ladder for a design team which had the scope of a designer specializing in certain area?
Yeah. Yeah, Abhinit, I think you really touched upon beautifully upon, the specialist role. And I think as managers, even as designers, either we have that feeling that we need to specialize or we need to go deeper in some. And as managers, it is, I think, very natural for us to keep scouting to people who potentially want to specialize. So I think it's a part of coaching and mentoring our designers for that, and also keeping an eye on the business of how our problems are going to get complex and eventually create room for people who can really go deeper and solve those problems. But really, I have these two recent examples, right, where I had two of my UX designers come up to me and say that, one wanted to really specialize into design systems because he wanted to get more deeper and build components, and he loved engineering as well and design as well. So that was something that gave him more joy to sort of build design systems. And the other one wanted to really become a hybrid between a designer and a product manager, so more of a strategy role and a lead role. And because a lot of times I think we work with PMs and we sometimes question that, is a PM role very different from a design strategist or a design thinker's role? Because we also have to go equally deeper. So both the designers, right, I had to carve out a very different set of pathways for them to eventually get successful. But really the conversation first starts with why. Why did you get this feeling that you need to specialize in this particular field, or you want to go into this particular segment? And why have you chosen this segment? And what made you realize that you really like it? Because sometimes it might just be that the person is exploring and really doesn't have an answer. And sometimes they have a very strong feeling that an experience has happened, and that made us realize that we want to get deeper. And so basically, as a manager, it's important for you to understand that what are the desires of your team or the junior designers you have, or senior designers or leads, and create a pathway for their success. Because eventually, if we try and understand their roles better, their desires better, and you would want people to really work on problem statements that they're passionate about, because as they work on problem statements that they're passionate about, the quality of the output that they're generating will be generally much higher than the quality that a generalist will really generate for that very specific problem, because that person might have really spent more time into learning that segment or that scenario or that use case much better. In this case, a design systems designer. So at the end, it's important to have people who are passionate, and it's the best decision you can take, because that signals that you are actually setting people up for success, and you're also setting your product for success by optimizing for quality at the end of the day, right? So I think Abhinit, now that this problem we're solving about design team, what about the org? See, I made a design team in a year, and with 8 to 10 people, and I've made some changes in designation, but someone wants to become, say, specialist in typography, or someone wants to become a specialist in, say, motion design. How do you evolve a set of people? Because eventually people don't want to work on same problem statements, and they don't want to change track. So how do you handle this segment, this part?
Sure. See, Jan, I'm a designer and you're a designer as well. And to me, a team structure is basically an IA diagram, right? It's a solution, right, to some problem. So we are trained to ask what is the problem, right? And the problem should be, in any org, the problem should be whatever your organization is trying to achieve in that quarter, year, or decade, right? If you do OKRs or KPIs or whatever. So let's say a designer on my team, as you said, wants to be a design, wants to really geek out or specialize in design systems. I would ask myself, how would I make a case for hiring a design systems engineer, say, to my boss, right? Who oftentimes is the CEO, but can also be the CPO or CTO in some companies. To me, as a designer, to me, a design system would make things more consistent and therefore easier for customers to use. If you're making a payment in product X, making payment in product Y should not be wildly different from it. If it's same, people will learn it in one place and apply that learning in another place. But if it's the CEO and the product folks, they probably care about ease of use, right? I would try to ask them if they see a benefit or to their current goals, if the ease of use of, say, the entire system increased by 10x. If it was the CTO, for example, I would tell them that a design system would help cut their front-end delivery time, right? Sometimes very significantly, or increase their crash-free sessions, because reusable components, right, are tested already, so they would crash less. And that's how I would kind of try to get alignment from them, that does this help? Is this really a problem for you to solve in your next 6 months or 1 year? And let's say I fail to get a good response from these folks, right? Or if I fail to relate this aspiration of my team with the aspiration of the org, then I will work very hard to find out what are the other problems that design could add value in. And let's say the CEO says, what I really want to know is which of these 3 features will result in maximum user adoption. I will simply go back to the designer and tell them, hey, have you thought about specializing in qualitative research first? We'll get to design systems later, right? So how I do that is 2 ways, right? I'm constantly, as a manager, and somebody said this applies to a lot of functions. Yes, it does. Design is just another function with a different scale. So as a manager, it's my job to figure out where the aspirations of my team are, who's looking up to who, right? Who wants to do what. And on the other hand, I will always think with my stakeholders and try to find out what is the problem that they are trying to solve, right? And how do I use these skills and apply them there. And most of the times, if you're in charge, if you're not the head of design, even if you're, say, the product person who manages designers or engineer who manages designers, this is what you do as a manager. And the only thing you're probably missing is knowledge of design, right? That's something you can't, short circuit. You have to kind of learn if you're in that position. But yeah, you're doing a great job if you're able to preempt, right? Before somebody coming to you and saying that I want to, specialize in something, you should always already have complex problems that they could go deep in. So that's how I would say that. And at the beginning of each planning cycle, right, whenever, whatever you do, KPIs, OKRs, as I said earlier, or you get drunk at an offsite and go and just decide your priorities for the next year, whatever your method is, the design managers should be involved. Out there looking at each challenge, be it revenue or cost savings or increased conversion, reduction in onboarding time, or just basically be searching for problems that are hard and can be solved by a design specialist. And if you're again, if you're a great person, then you'll find it faster than your designers would want to specialize in them. So if you hear your CMO ranting about how our brand feels less upmarket than say competitor X or Y, start thinking about who in your team geeked out the most about Instagram's recent rebrand, and there you might have a charter and a plan for a brand designer or a brand team eventually. That's kind of how I do it. I mentioned a brand team, but you're at Microsoft, Shaheena, and I think they have one designer of every kind that has ever existed, and that's as big a scale as it gets. So what kind of specializations exist there? And what kind of different problems do designers solve there, which probably most of the startups are yet to discover?
Yeah. Yeah, Abhinit, I think you touched upon very deeply, and I loved how you answered that with really deep insights on how you manage the stakeholders and prepare a business case for, hiring specialists. Coming back to Microsoft, I think Microsoft is actually a very giant portfolio-based company, right? It is known for its operating system design and Office Suite, cloud computing platform, Azure, Bing, Visual Studio, and even hardware designs, right? Xbox 360 and now Metaverse and AR, VR and whatnot, right? So I think product eventually leads to specialized kind of a design team formation, right? And internally, if you really talk, there are all kind of designers that are there across the world at Microsoft, be it industrial storyteller designers, which is a completely different form of design where the art and main output is storytelling. You have UX, R writers, motion designers, content designers, UX designers, AR, VR designers, 3D designers, 2D designers, and now we have Metaverse, which has different set of designers again, game design, brand design, illustrator, all of that, like even platforms. And apart from that, as design evolves, right, the specialization also evolves. Like we didn't have designers who would specifically want to work in Metaverse, Web3, crypto space and all of this. This is fairly new, and you will see now that people have tended or designers have been tending towards special industries. Like there are some designers who in their heart of hearts know that I only want to work in fintech, or I want to work in only crypto, or I want to work only in e-commerce space, right? So based on the bent of mind of a designer, a lot of they're choosing their fields. But really touching upon Microsoft, we not just have specializations, but we also have teams which are formed, which are also called V teams, which are formed for a specific purpose or product and project, which are bought from different teams from different parts of the world sometimes, or from different teams from a different org, and to solve a particular problem. So that becomes a more, I would say, a squad system, which is formed just for time specific, product specific, project specific, and output specific. And this is to basically ensure the quality of the output if you want the best of the best from particular functions working on a problem statement, right? And coming back to, very special teams, like sometimes you will see designers just focusing on calendar design or task design, no code designers, right? And it only makes sense because if you see the way people switch jobs also, most likely a person who's worked previously in mobility will land up in a company which is somewhat touching upon that aspect of say problem statement. And when you look back, right, it only helps because you elevate your expertise in that field. So if tomorrow I want to say build something in ride hailing, I know I need to call Abhinit because he has probably the best advice for me, right? And if I want to speak to somebody in fintech, then I know what kind of a designer or a design leader I need to talk to. So really, these are the kind of, like, I think specializations we have. And inside Microsoft, again, there are a lot of specialists that we have who focus on really particular problem, because not every problem is something that a UX designer will be able to solve. And that's probably for the best, because we're optimizing for output at scale. which impacts like millions, not just 100, 200, maybe 500 million users, 600 billion users, million users. So I think at that scale, you have to be so mindful about the expertise that designers bring on the table, and this is only going to, I think, elevate as the industry matures. Yeah, so basically there are three key takeaways, I think, for us from this entire monologue that Abhinit and I have been doing, is that hire a designer early. There shouldn't be any compromise on that. Really hire early and create room for specialization, to keep designers happy. That is equally very, very important to build a great culture in the team. And always try to preempt the scale, preempt the complex problems, so that your designer's aspirations are aligned with the organizational aspirations. Yeah, with that, I think we are happy for questions. Hope this made sense, our monologue.
Yeah, there are some questions, some good ones. Is there? Actually, one. I think there's one question from Anuvrat. Do you see it, Shaheena?
From what?
From Anuvrat. What is unique / different about designers in the way they think? And then there's a second part, we can come to that later.
What is different in designers in the way they think? The way they think. And how best to work with them. This guy's not a designer, I can know that. He's saying how to work with them. Yeah, but it's not about how they think. I feel the way is what is why it is important for a designer to think that way, right? It is not that I think a designer or a user experience folk will always keep user at the center. And it is not his job to shine as a designer. I think his success is always in when a user pain point is solved. So they would think, and their core expertise would be to always think in a way that they solve for a user pain point. And because if they think any other way, then they're not being true to the product. They're not being true to even the team for which they're working with, right? So at the end of the day, I think it is unique to them, maybe you can say, but I think that uniqueness should be in everybody, even in a product manager, engineer, business leader. Because if your user is not going to use the product, it doesn't matter how you're thinking. It just doesn't matter. So user centricity, I would say, is probably key here. And that is why maybe many people are not able to relate to designers when they keep talking about this is what the customer said, this is what the customer said. And it creates a lot of friction as well. But that's a good friction to have, I think. Maybe Abhinit, you can take the next part or even elaborate.
I've been thinking about this for some time, man, like at least a few years. Especially because design thinking also exists, right? Which kind of tends to imply that there is, a designer way of thinking. I think, Anuvrat, you have to look at, let's break this down to first principles, right? Like who's a designer? Let's assume somebody not like Shaheena or me, who don't have, like somebody who has a design degree. And look at curriculums, what are they taught? Where do they come from? A lot of designers, as we showed in that slide, right? A lot of designers will come from engineering. Especially true in India, right? In software, and a lot of designer will come from humanities or psychology or even art, right? Those kind of backgrounds. So the difference in their thinking would be the difference in how they've been trained and what they've been taught, right? Personally, as an engineer, being an engineer and then being a designer, I find myself thinking very non-linearly as a designer, right? Like I jump from what would this be in 5 years to back to what would this be in 1 week, whereas engineering is more linear, right? There's a finite objective and you have to approach it, and there is a best way of doing things because you're working with computers. But designers are working with people, and people are very hard to predict, and therefore like we have to constantly be iterative in our thinking and go in loops. For example, a good designer is also, generally speaking, are good visualizers, right? That happens because you're taught, you have some training in craft, you have some training in graphic design or some visual skills. Then you can visualize things better. Designers also tend to think a lot about the customers as people instead of consumers, right? If I design this thing, what would the ethical impact of this be? What would the impact on society be? Which sometimes I think other disciplines or other functions tend to not do so much. Other than that, I think, yeah, these are the things which are mostly coming from how designers are trained. Other than think that we generally think the same way. There's no special magic sauce. And the second part, how to work with them. I think there are few things I wish people knew. One is that, yeah, we do art, but there's art in everything. I've seen some piece of code which is basically poetry, right? So there's art in everything. So we do art, but I don't think that we are artists necessarily. Um, uh, I do sometimes enjoy that compliment, but you should stop thinking of them as artists. Refer to that Krebs cycle of creativity thing, and design is its own thing. Know that we don't just, you give us a problem, and we don't just sit and create something without a lot of thought in it. Everything that's on the screen, everything has a reason behind it. Everything has an intent behind it. When I was a young designer, like people would like, this is really good. You knocked it out of the park, right? Or somebody would come in and they were like, this is all wrong. This button needs to go to the top. This button can't just go to the top. I have 50 iterations behind this. I've thought about everything, what could happen. And then I've come up with this. So ask them questions, right? Another thing is designers know very little. They tend to be very curious people who always question, what do we not know, right? What have we overlooked? What are the unintended consequences of this thing, right? So and also designers are typically people who are not, have not run businesses before or have not coded before, a lot of them. So understand that they are trying to understand the domain at the same time. So try and, if they're not asking questions, try and prompt them to ask questions. Understand how my backend works. Understand how my business makes money. So I think these 2-3 things would make it much easier to work with designers. Don't assume they're artists. Encourage them to ask more questions and understand the domain and the problem space better. And take their questions. It's their job to ask questions about what do we not know, right? So try and tolerate that a little better. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much for that, Abhinit and Shaheena. Sure. Folks, if there are any other questions, now is the time to ask. I have 2 questions which were targeted to each of you. One question in the sign-up forms. Although you have answered probably both, I'll just take up. So the first one was targeted to Abhinit, which is, I'm curious about design systems, building or following one. At what point does one think about building one?
Okay. So design systems, again, design system is a solution, right? What you can do a kick-ass design without having a design system. You can do a really bad design despite having a design system. Typically, design systems solve 2 broad areas of problems. Either you have a problem in efficiency, right? Like you can't produce, designs fast enough, right? Or you have a problem with quality, right? Like your design is wildly inconsistent and that is resulting in users being confused, right? So it's either to save development effort, right, and build more robust system, or it is to increase consistency and improve ease of use. If you don't have those problems, you don't need a design system, right? If you have those problems, then you do, right? So if you find yourself spending 3 months to build features, and if you carefully look at the screens and the flows, and you see the essential basic atoms and molecules are the same, right? But you find yourself rewriting them every single time. You're basically wasting resources, right? So that's when you should think about making a design system. The other thing is, if you find that your customers use product A, right, and the funnels there are perfectly fine, but product B does the same, but there are higher drop-offs there, right? Then identifying patterns which are common across your customer journeys, that will help you make things easier to use, right? So those are, if you see those 2 problems, invest in design systems. If those 2 are not your problems, you have enough people, your engineers are amazing and they code everything from scratch amazingly well every single time, you don't need design system, right? Also, one last, it does run all the time. Like when you're building products which are wildly different from each other, Like you will rarely see a design system which will both be front end and back end. For example, material design is one example, but I would love to find a company which uses material for all their internal portal as well as for their customer facing apps, right? So it rarely happens. Um, but yeah, if you have those problems, then make a design system. If you don't have it, you're fine.
Okay, thank you for that, Abhinit.
If that answers the question.
Yeah, it definitely does. I got to learn a few more things as well. Right. So this one was targeted to Shaheena in the form, although again, I think we have answered it. What is the general difference between design leader and a design manager? And at what point should one get involved in product development? Anything that we have not already shared?
Sure. I'll break the question into two. The first is, what is the difference between a design manager and a design leader? Again, the answer is not very straightforward. It again touches upon very different aspects of a designer's journey. I think a design manager is also in sorts a design leader, right? In every company, you might not necessarily have a design leader who's 20 years of experience. I don't think those designers exist, 20, 30 years of experience. No, that's a joke. They do exist. But I think a design leader, and in every, again, going back to the scale of the organization, the size of the organization, it's very important to understand that. So in a design org, which bears just 5 designers, the designer with probably the most experience might most probably land up, setting standards, culture for the org. And that person acts as a design leader for his org. But if you're talking about a design manager versus an industry design leader, then I think really what you bring on the table, which is much more than design. As a leader, you're inspiring people, you're inspiring managers, you're inspiring design leads to deliver great output, quality product. And you're also focusing on building design org culture, design structures. You're also involved in the business side of things so that you can preempt, like we mentioned, one of the key takeaways, you can preempt the future of the organization and bolster your team to be prepared for that change. Because everything is constantly changing, and a leader truly has to have that insight into what kind of changes will come in the future, what kind of people we might need. Do we need more generalists? Do we need more specialists? Do we need mixed of that? And do we need a design ops team, completely different function of a design ops, but a very necessary one to have as you scale? So really, a leader is much more than somebody who's just delivering product. And as you scale, right, leadership becomes more important. And same for engineering also, same for product and business also. There has to be somebody or a pathway for people to set this up, because if you're scaling and your culture is not in place, be sure to, be prepared for people to leave. If you're scaling and say you don't have a great pathway for success for designers, whether generalists and specialists, again, that causes a lot of negative impact on your team. And as you scale, a leader's role also becomes more and more complex. Like I said, he starts making sense of a bigger picture. He's more part of a vision of the mission of the company, and making sure that designers really contribute more than what they actually have. It's a very, very high level, and also it's a zoomed out version of a responsibility. But at the same time, a leader needs to have that humility to be connected to the last person in the org. It sounds like a really big and impactful role, but it is one. Our design leaders are getting that recognition today. They are getting, like we always keep saying, seat at the table there is. And I think designers are becoming, design leaders are also becoming more mindful about learning about the business, right? So they are very well plugged into the business side of the things, and they make sure that knowledge also trickles down to our designers, and they also become more involved in a 360-degree world, that because we're solving problem for the world, our human being who's at the, outside your office. So having that view is very, very important for a leader. I know I gave a lengthy answer, but it is leadership is a complex role. You really can't define it in one sentence. Yeah. And what was the other? Sorry, I missed that.
So this would I guess more be so I'll ask the question directly. So where should one get involved in different stages of product development?
Yeah, I think one designer's hands down there. Like I said, day one. Abhinit has also said day one. Please don't wait for the spec to come. Please don't wait for the PM to like, okay, now we are thinking of doing this. I think designers can be proactive. They can act as a PM. I mean, ideas, seriously, ideas can come from anybody. Even a PM can get it. Even an engineer can get a brilliant idea. And I don't see why designers cannot get that brilliant idea, right? I always see designers and anybody who's part of the product journey as a product maker at the end of the day. We have the power of craft, but we also have a power of critical thinking. So really be involved from day one. It'll help us get so much more context, so much more data, so much more understanding, and make us more, passionate about what we're building, rather than when the spec comes and we read it and then build a preconceived notion about a problem, and we really don't know if that is a problem. So maybe being part of formulating a problem statement is a great place to start.
Understand. Thank you for that. Just a quick follow-up question. After that, we'll take a final question that was shared in chat. So you mentioned a lot on about design leaders, and you mentioned that many of them are getting the seat at the table now. Abhinit gave a reply to that as well. Okay, so my question is, can you name a few of these design leaders who actively share their learnings or advice on social media that people, all the rest in the audience can follow?
Abhinit.
Okay.
I never tweet.
Abhinit never tweets, but Abhinit has a list. Abhinit has a list. I don't tweet Gyan, so I know that I'm not on that list.
I have a list. If you go to my Twitter, you'll find designers in India. That's a list. You can also go to, not plugging Design at Gojek, but you can go to Design at Gojek and you can find a list there for designers at Gojek. And other than memes, a bunch of people do share serious stuff. But China, who else? Hardik Pandya is one. I think he's one of the people who actually takes the effort to write down blog posts and share stuff. Jay Datta is another one. Navneet Nair is another one.
Yes.
In Indonesia, there is Tri Nugraha, another great designer. There is Budi Tanrim here. There is, so yeah, the list is endless. But follow those two lists, you'll find most of the designers there.
Thank you. I'm also going to do that now.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. In that case, just a final question. If this is on the lighter note, where did it go? This is another one from Anuvrat. Right. So you both have had a great career in design. What's your biggest mistake as a designer in your career?
What is the biggest mistake?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can go. I think I would personally say, because I've worked in startups. And for me, I think one of the biggest mistake designers, or I can say for me, is that I've had a learning that, yes, being focused on design is great, being focused on your craft is great, but at the other side is, how do you manage your own design career? At some points, you will engage with people where you probably think this is the right company to engage with, but how do you vet that? So I think having those boundaries early on, whether it is be with salary negotiations or be about setting expectations, all of that, right? Most of the times you'll see the companies will call that shots, but I think as early designers, just being very, very clear about your boundaries and about very binary things is very important, because you just want to make sure that at the end of the day, you're focusing on your career, your craft, your work, and for solving problems, rather than focusing on really operation side of the things. And I think that's one mistake that I did, and I learned from it. So seriously, like when you're engaging with a company, have the negotiables and the non-negotiables very clearly. And for you also personally, have that right on the table before you engage with anybody in the product design tech, or even personally, just have that, be it salary, be it even if you're a person who's fixated on designation, have that clear. Do not wait for people to communicate. Have papers very right. If you're engaging with startups, make sure you have every paper work done. Do not just take verbal communication is no communication. So in a world where everything is documented, make sure you have things documented. And that's a mistake that I did, because sometimes we get overtly passionate and then we just lose sight of some of these concrete things. So I would say that's one of my mistakes, and how I moved on from them.
Thank you for that.
Yep. Oh, my biggest mistake, other than getting into design itself, I think assuming that since everybody keeps saying design is so important and customer experience is so important and user experience is so important, assuming that that's always true. That's been my biggest mistake. Assuming that every time you're working with stakeholders, of course, like giving customers the best experience would be the thing that will be on the top of their mind always. I think the reality is much harsher. I think designers tend to, think that, be a little more principled, be a little more dreamy-eyed. So they always think like, obviously, everybody understands this, but no, not always. So you have to constantly keep educating people about what design is, because design keeps changing and it comes in so many forms, and it can be plugged into so many problems, right? That you constantly need to educate people on, hey, a designer can help you, right? If your performance review system in your company is introducing anxiety in your employees, a designer can help. If your ad is not getting response for applicants in engineering, a designer can help, right? If your slides look sad, designer can help. If you need stickers to distribute at conferences, designers can help. I think people forget that. I assume that after 15 years people would learn what design is. CEOs and product people would read as much about design as they read about engineering, or they read about sales, or they read about other things, but they simply don't. So that assumption has been my biggest mistake, and trying to fix that now, right?
Thank you for that, Abhinit.
Sure.
Right, that's about it, folks. If there's any other question, now is the time to ask. Yeah, Shaheena, share the I'll copy. Okay. Just copy. If not, yeah, then that's about it, folks. Thank you so much for joining in. Thank you so much once again, Shaheena and Abhinit, for this session. It was really engaging. We had some interesting questions from the audience. Yeah, that's about it, folks. Have a great evening. And yes, I quickly shared, I have actually shared this YouTube playlist. So like I mentioned earlier, this is the 4th and final session. We had 3 other sessions earlier. Do check that out. Those were really, really amazing. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you once again, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.